I've trusted him for years. We both have. I can't help but feel like he's keeping us in the dark.
You're a good person, James. You've always done what you think is best for the people. But it's high time you stopped talking about trust and started showing it.
Despite getting introduced in Volume 2, Ironwood stayed pretty close to the background up until Volume 7. Only nominally connected to the main story or main characters, Ironwood still kept appearing, getting steadily more screen time and emphasis than even other adults within the cast. Glinda isn't the one who talks to Yang after she allegedly broke Mercury's leg, Ironwood was. Port or Oobleck don't get a moment to show off their power killing a Beowulf, Ironwood did. Klein, Winter, and Willow weren't there to stand up for Weiss at the party. Ironwood was. Crow didn't bother to send a letter to Leo, but he sent one to Ironwood. Despite refusing to properly join the plot for 5 years, Ironwood has been hanging on to our collective interest by also refusing to properly leave. Regular appearances and references to the General made his inevitable inclusion into the plot something that ended up having years of build-up. By the time Volume 7 finally came around, we'd been itching to know more about our Tin Man for an even longer amount of time than we'd been desperately wondering what the fuck actually was with Ruby's silver eyes. And that build-up paid off. Ironwood not only got to finally shine, but in fact took over the show. As is constantly the case with RWBY, the title team are never really allowed to be the focus for any given volume, and for this one, Ironwood was one of the true protagonists of the story, getting not only the most interesting development, but also one of the best fight scenes we've been given in 4 years. And then Volume 8 ruined him. This interesting, complex character with 6 years of build-up and an entire volume of development suddenly, out of nowhere, became just another cocky bad guy, virtually identical to Cinder, Watts, Salem, and all the other smarmy, better-than-you baddies in the show. One of the new writers, Eddie Rivas, even refers to Ironwood as a genocide general. The showrunners seem to be under the impression that this shift in character for James was done well. They even say in the DVD commentary that they wanted to make Ironwood's progression into villainy subtle and make sense. You fucking didn't. Which is honestly almost impressive, because of the whole cast who could have subtly turned into a villain, Ironwood is the only one that actually got set up for that. If you go back across my older videos, you'll notice that I tend to comment often on how I can't tell if we, the viewers, should trust Ironwood or not. Volume 2 introduces us to the General with his oppressive army behind him. Penny implies that Ironwood is the one who has her following such strict rules. He admits that his robots look scary. The girls fight one of his new paladins being manned by Torchwick. Cinder uses his scroll to hack into the tournament. Crow and Glinda seem to not like him, and though Ozpin resists their resentment, the old headmaster still ends up clashing with Ironwood. From the very beginning, Ironwood has been nebulously trustworthy, being headstrong compounded with thinly veiled fear. The possibility that James would turn on the heroes felt altogether possible, not due to being evil or corrupt, but instead the fact that the General could very easily get frightened enough to assume the worst out of his allies, to rely too much on brute force instead of thinking straight. And what might be the worst part is that they were doing that right. Ironwood enacted a dust embargo and closed borders out of fear over an idea of a threat in a different kingdom, insisting that he can't trust someone who's part of the secret council of good guys, Leo, despite not being aware of Lionheart's double-crossing. I get that Eddie is making a reference with the title Genocide General, but if you actually paid attention to the show, Paranoid General is the significantly more accurate nickname. But that paranoia isn't unfounded. Not only did Ironwood see his entire army turned against him during the battle at Beacon, but he also watched his personal project get killed in front of him as his dishonesty about Penny got outed by Cinder on public TV and radio. It's no wonder his plan shifted from make the biggest army I can to make a small group I know I'll be able to trust. With his goal of raising amity to try and unify the world in action, the Maiden located and his second-in-command, most trusted companion, ready to take on the duties of the Maiden in the short time the Old One has left, and his perfect protector of the people rebuilt and stronger than ever, Ironwood had everything under control. And then our heroes showed up. Arriving in a stolen airship, and with one of the grim-attracting relics that the very evil that has Ironwood so scared and is searching for on them, Team RWBY and friends immediately make Ironwood's life harder, and on top of that, the only man James feels he could seek advice from is now locked inside some child's brain, hidden away because our heroes bullied him over his past trauma for no reason, but Ironwood doesn't get to know that. In fact, Ironwood doesn't get to know a lot. Because despite losing their shit on Ozpin for not telling them that Salem can't be killed, the kids insist on lying to the man that they want as their ally a ton. They lie about how many questions the lamp has left, they lie about Ozpin hiding from them after they punched him and Oscar in the face. They don't even tell James what they had learned from the lamp when they used it.
No more lies. No more half-truths.
But all the questions were used up already.
What if we've been talking to that liar this whole time?
We were in a train crash, and ever since, well, suddenly Oz wasn't there anymore.
All this lying despite Ironwood immediately opening up to the kids and telling them literally everything, his entire plan. He even returns the lamp back to them, a decision that ends up getting the relic stolen. So why? Because Team RWBY don't know if they can trust him yet, even though he gives the kids their licenses, gave Yang her new state-of-the-art arm for free, helped fight alongside Crow when Beacon was under attack, gave Pietro the funding and resources he needed to revive Penny, defended Weiss at the party. Oh, but he had the Aesops arrest the kids when they showed up. In a stolen airship. So that makes him bad.
You stole an Atlas airship?
Okay, yeah, it was stolen.
Why do my actions have consequences?
Oh, but he told Winter and Penny about the relics and maidens, and that makes him bad. Not like Crow, who also did that with 8 high school dropouts.
You told them? I filled them in. You filled them in?
Oh, but he intends to tell Atlas and eventually the world about Salem, which would cause a panic, leading to him hoarding his troops to defend against the inevitable Grim attack the panic would cause. A plan that RWBY not only agrees with and celebrates its success in Volume 7,
By the name of Salem.
He's doing it.
but one that she even employs at a larger scale in Volume 8.
And if we've done everything right, then I'm talking to all of Remnant right now.
Oh, but Mantle is rough. That makes him a bad guy. Because he's focusing all his resources into finishing the Amity plan that RWBY agrees with so much. There's economic turmoil in the kingdom that he doesn't even rule because remember there's a whole council running Atlas. It's not just him. Even though Ironwood is trying to help Mantle.
Things in Mantle have been hard to manage lately. I'm not blind to its issues.
He's got his robo-soldiers, the Aesops, and Penny keeping the citizens safe. Oh, but Yang kicked one of the security bots because it took her picture, which makes them automatically evil, right? It's not like one should expect increased security after a terrorist attack nuked a whole city and destroyed all long-distance communication. Quite frankly, Team RWBY strike me as the kind of people who would throw a tantrum because they have to take their shoes off at the airport now.
I'm a victim!
So they can't trust Ironwood, but they can trust the known criminal who already attempted to attack them, who they've never met before now? Team RWBY's morals are harder to keep track of than this show's constant retcons. This insistence of the kids that they can't trust Ironwood yet is completely unfounded and barely affects the plot. Learning about all the shit they end up revealing later in the volume when the kingdom's already under attack earlier wouldn't have changed anything. He'd still plan on Winter getting the maiden powers, he'd still work on getting Amity up. If the important part of all of this is the Salem can't be killed problem, you know, the thing RWBY and co. shat themselves over Ozpin not telling them, then that, at least, should be the one thing the kids insist on telling Ironwood. He could start working with Pietro and other scientists to figure out if there's a way to contain Salem, or reverse her immortality, or fucking anything to properly address the problem. If not for James to know what roadblocks he needs to look out for in his quest to save Remnant, then at least so then Team RWBY and Ranger don't look like gigantic shithead hypocrites. I mean, fuck, the whole reason they even stole the stupid airship in the first place is because they specifically set out to run to Atlas so Ironwood could help them keep the lamp safe. Even though they all decided to hate Ozpin, they continued to follow his orders of go find James and Atlas. If you don't know if you can trust the General, why did you hinge your entire plan on going to the General for help? There's just no good reason for the kids to not confide in him. They had always trusted him before. Doing this doesn't affect the story in any good way. All it's done is made our heroes assholes who think it's fine if they push Oscar around when Ozpin keeps secrets, but it's all Gucci if they do the exact ass same fucking thing. And what's really befuddling is that they didn't need the heroes to not trust Ironwood for his descent to make sense. Throughout Volume 7, Ironwood gets continual pushback on his plan, with Robin's cronies stealing his resources, hindering his progress on the world-saving Amity plan that RWBY ganks later. Penny gets blamed for murder, which in turn puts pressure on him, Nora won't stop yelling at him, and finally it gets revealed that the group of heroes Ironwood had trusted all this time had spilled the beans on his Amity plan to the very woman who kept stealing his resources behind his back. Watts turns off the heat, throwing Mantle into chaos, which in turn causes a grim rampage, and then despite employing all his forces to keep the city safe, a successful mission by the way, and Ironwood defeating and capturing one of the main players in Salem's chess game, he finds Cinder's glass. The very same image that had haunted him, the reminder of how he failed so thoroughly as his army was turned against him. She had been in his office. She had left her mark again. He had lost again. Even if Team RWBY had been up front with Ironwood in the first place, Cinder's chess piece in his office, compounded with the revelation that Yang and Blake had defied his trust, would be enough to send Ironwood over the edge. But as it is, Team RWBY are honestly the biggest thing that turns their ally into a villain.
The staff and the lamp have to be locked away.
I thought you said we could keep it.
That was before you lied to me about the lamp.
Why do my actions have consequences?
You see, despite explicitly coming to Atlas to seek help from Ironwood, despite happily accepting the free upgraded weapons and gear from him, despite sleeping in his comfy facilities for an unknown amount of time, despite receiving their huntsman licenses from him, despite the countless times Ironwood has stood up for or assisted the girls, despite literally beating one of the main council villains minutes ago, Ironwood has the audacity to imply that Team RWBY aren't perfect. He has the balls to call them out for being dishonest. He understandably gets upset with them for going behind his back. Which means he has to be evil now. Talking to the General, regaining his trust, proving your actions were in the right, even just trying to keep him as an ally to help with the gigantic war on the horizon. Not an option. Due to simply being unhappy with Team RWBY for lying, the exact same thing RWBY had done to Ozpin when they learned he hadn't been honest with them, it's now, Red Alert, Ironwood can't be trusted, I always hated that guy anyway. What? To remind you what the writers had said about Ironwood, it was, they wanted to make Ironwood's progression into villainy subtle and make sense. And to really show how ridiculous of a notion that is, let's look at the gravity fight. Ironwood is faced against a de facto bad guy, a member of Team Witch and certified villain. Ironwood is the one we want to win, not only for being the not antagonist here, but also because we want Ironwood's plan to work, since that will help save Mantle by getting its heat back on. The song that plays during this fight is called fucking Hero. It details how much Ironwood is willing to sacrifice to keep his people, his kingdom, his world safe. That's not a villain song. Ironwood's victory is triumphant. We are made to cheer that he wins. And then in the very same episode, we're told Ironwood is a bad guy because he's upset that Blake and Yang went behind everyone's backs to tell a criminal his plans.
No more lies. No more half-truths.
They haven't written a villain here. They've written a complex, morally gray character that's interesting and nuanced. But they insist on treating him like he's a black and white villain, even though Team RWBY are the ones who are in the wrong here. Hell, even though Ironwood shoots Oscar at the end of the volume, I still could see him as someone who's lost but could be saved. Side note, I saw a lot of people were confused on why Ironwood shot Oscar. It's because he doesn't think he can trust him. Shoot the farm boy and hopefully Ozpin goes into the body of someone I can actually rely on this time. Regardless of that, though, Rooster Teeth have not established Ironwood as this genocide general, but instead as a stressed, paranoid, PTSD-suffering man trying his best to be a hero despite the people he trusted betraying him. But they didn't want Ironwood to be this complex, interesting character. They wanted a genocide general. A villain. So for Volume 8, they ruined him. Ironwood had started to evil snark at the end of Volume 7, most notably with the statement that he planned on flying Atlas away, leaving Mantle behind.
Yes, I would.
But this becomes significantly more egregious in Volume 8, with Ironwood starting the volume by point-blank shooting a man for no reason. Ah yes, the descent into villainy was totally subtle. Because they don't actually know how to write villains, they just instruct Jason Rose to talk like he's evil. Very suddenly, Ironwood sounds more like he's doing a Jacques impression than actually voicing his thoughts.
Leveraging the lives of her friends? It's the only way to make Penny listen to reason.
They chose to make Ironwood go out of his way to be evil, despite it not making sense. Why have him work with the evil Dr. Man he just stopped to hack Penny, rather than make the evil Dr. Man turn the heat back on in his city? Why have Ironwood threaten to bomb Mantle immediately after the main threat of Salem and her whale got destroyed? The problem's gone now, at least temporarily, so why turn yourself into the threat? What happened to risking it all to keep you safe? Well, see, the thing is, since Ironwood's a bad guy now, they have to make him be explicitly bad by having him do this ham-fisted villainy. A good guy doesn't shoot an innocent man in the face. A good guy doesn't try to bomb his own city. They have to make Ironwood do these extreme, out-of-character things to sell him as evil, because they had not actually established him as evil. I'm going to explain that in a second, but first I'd like to read out some lines from Volume 8. Atlas is only Salem's current target, and once she's done here, she'll move on to the rest of Remnant. Unless we leave, Salem will destroy Atlas, and with it, any hope humanity has left. So then, it's impossible. She will return, and she will throw everything she has at us until there is nothing left. Then nothing has changed, arguing over what to do while the kingdom waits to die. They were our last chance, now I have nothing. Who do you think said these lines? I'll give you a second to think. Hell, pause the video and leave a comment and the timestamp with your guess if you'd like. Got your answer? Well, I'm sorry, but it was a bit of a trick question. These quotes are from two different characters, Ironwood and RWBY. Fascinatingly similar for being opposing forces in the narrative, right? That's because, like I said, they don't know how to write villains, so instead they write the same character for everybody, with the only difference being that the bad guys decide to enjoy killing innocents. The only real difference between Ironwood and RWBY's dialogue for the volume is that Ironwood suddenly thinks bombing his own city is a good idea, and Jason Rose has to say everything menacingly now. Ironwood has to break tables while RWBY gets to cry on the stairs. If their mannerisms were switched, if RWBY was the one angrily throwing phones around, and Ironwood was the one having a pity party on some steps, you wouldn't have to change their dialogue to convincingly swap the two's places in the narrative. If the only thing distinguishing your villain's dialogue from your hero's dialogue is tone, then you are making a poorly written story with poorly written characters. And honestly, this isn't new. We get the same holier-than-thou dialogue we see from Cinder constantly also showing up with Team RWBY. The only difference is that Jessica Negri has to read her lines condescendingly, while Lindsay Jones has to read their lines self-righteously.
You deserve this, Arthur.
You were. Then you trained us.
So, to finally reiterate this point for the last time, the writers had no way of believably making Ironwood suddenly a villain, and so they threw out 6 years of characterization and development to have him overnight transform into a genocide general. A true giga-brain idea for a volume where the final boss and her entire group of baddies show up to face the heroes. Yeah, transform the fan-favorite ally into a cartoon villain for no reason. Can't keep Ironwood around. He's not a girl that the fans and writers can fantasize about. And the truly befuddling thing about destroying Ironwood's character so he can be a side villain during a finale that sees our title team fighting Cinder for the first time literally ever is that it not only ruined our Tin Man, but it ruined our heroes and the show's message about morals too. Let's all make sure we don't forget that in order for James to become a villain, it had to include the kids lying to him about everything because they for no reason decided that they can't trust him, making them all massive hypocrites.
No more lies. No more half-truths.
Not to mention the fact that the girls treat Ironwood's lie over Amity being completed, something he did to trick Watts into going there so he could be captured, like a grave sin on the same level as child murder, while also ignoring how they lied for a whole ass volume to the General about the main fucking plot, only adding to this blatant hypocrisy.
You just said that. To lure out Watts.
You said we could keep it.
That was before you lied to me about the lamp. Before you lied to us about Robin.
But let's also take a look at what made the girls believe that Ironwood was wholly a person who can't be trusted. The big thing that Ironwood had done was not only called Team RWBY out on being dishonest, but he also made a decision. With Mantle falling apart and Salem at his front door, Ironwood decides to use the staff to fly Atlas and the important people and relics on it to safety, save half his kingdom, and keep the three most important elements in this war, the staff, lamp, and maiden, as far away from Salem as possible. Guarantee half of the populace is out of danger, while also holding on to the things needed to save the world, despite sacrificing the other half. But Team RWBY doesn't like that. They think it's better to risk everyone, Atlas and Mantle, getting destroyed or hurt in an attempt to save everyone. This is not a black and white problem. There is no one morally correct answer. But the writers want our heroes to always exclusively be right. Team RWBY decides that Ironwood's choice in this proverbial trolley problem is the evil option because Ironwood chooses to prioritize speed over trying to save everyone, which would risk the increased possibility of a Grim attack. But the thing is, Ironwood was right. Due to the heroes' actions, Ironwood isn't able to fly Atlas away, and the city does get attacked, an event that none of the heroes try to help with. Yang, Jean, and Ren ignore the civilians to instead only focus on saving Oscar from the whale, and Ruby, Weiss, and Blake sit around Weiss's house. Hell, even when the kids were doing the good thing by running around saving people of Mantle, they kept bitching about it.
We're never going to sleep again. I just know it.
Coming in from the west. The huntsman there could really use some backup.
Since he was unable to fly his city to safety, the only thing keeping his people safe is Ironwood's army and his order to have everyone evacuated to the subways.
I am evacuating all citizens to the subway.
But yeah, now's the time to have a "but they're just kids, war is bad" message, when the only thing keeping these people safe after Team RWBY decides to fuck over James's plan is the very soldiers and huntsmen who trained for this job explicitly. Alright, Marrow, how about we just let the Grim tear through the town and kill everyone then? Is that what you want? Like, I understand the idea of having an anti-militarism message, but having a guy that's maybe 4 years older than some of his also adult co-workers complain that they're doing the job they wanted because the heroes of the story kept the people from being safe without conflict isn't how you do it, Chief. Fuck, Flint and Neon may just be kids, but at least they're actually trying to do something about the problem. Meanwhile, Ruby, Weiss, and Blake are content to peacefully drink tea and sit on their asses. Tangent aside, I appreciate the idea of Team RWBY's optimism and naivety being a key part in their simple soul save world plot, but in this situation, the heroes end up doing far more damage than good. Due to their actions, Atlas and Mantle citizens got attacked by the Grim, both the relics were lost to Salem, Penny died permanently this time, the surviving citizens were dumped into a hyper-dangerous desert where they continued to get killed by Grim, and both Atlas and Mantle, all of those people's homes, and all of the super important, life-saving, helping the blind old lady's technology that is only ever made in Atlas, were all completely destroyed and submerged in freezing water. All while the girls bitched about no one coming to do the work for them and how this is too hard.
Do we just wait for someone to come?
Thinking help would come, but it didn't.
Which isn't even mentioning how RWBY probably caused a panic worldwide with her message, causing everywhere to be attacked by hordes of Grim, like how Ironwood worried would happen.
Why finally tell the people about Salem?
To handle the panic that would break out in Atlas.
Panic is inevitable.
Oh, and the coolest part is that I guarantee you the writers won't acknowledge that it was our heroes' fault that everything went to shit. Because they already did. RWBY admits that she messed up, that her plan didn't work, but Yang insists, "No, you're perfect, you did the right thing."
But we got Oscar back. And did a lot more that was never in the plan.
If your characters aren't allowed to learn from their mistakes, why are they even there? Not to mention, it turns out, Team RWBY could have gotten the solution to the trolley problem they wanted if they actually tried working with Ironwood rather than villainizing him.
All we can do for the moment is what we can to save Mantle.
You have sacrificed everyone else. You squeezed Mantle until it broke.
The kids had the time to evacuate Mantle. If they had worked with James on a plan to get the civilians somewhere safe from Salem, probably along with the relics and Maiden, then things could have worked out much better. Penny could still be alive. The heroes wouldn't have a body count of innocents that they put in danger hanging over them. And hell, maybe even Atlas and Mantle would be not destroyed if they just worked together. Like how Ozpin planned to do. Like how RWBY keeps pretending they want to do.
There are no sides. We're all facing Salem together.
We must work together if we are to fight Salem and win.
Sadly, General Ironwood can no longer be trusted.
If there are no sides, if the goal is to not let Salem divide you, then stop villainizing any man who isn't completely bending to your will, who dares to not say exclusively the truth all the time. It doesn't help that they make every character a total Nimrod to force the unnecessary "James is genocide general" plot. Don't hack Penny, idiot. Don't work with Watts, idiot. Turn the heat back on, idiot. Don't bomb your own city, idiot. Don't lie to your allies, idiot. Team RWBY may not have liked Ironwood's plan, but at least he had one. The girls' gigabrain idea was to just throw a bunch of sick families into the Vacuo desert for literally no given reason. You know, that one that Neo and Roman talk about being like one of the most dangerous places ever in the new book that just came out? The books are canon, right? That's what you keep saying. So if Vacuo's danger level is known information and canon, why did the heroes decide to take the people there?
You're playing as Vacuo, which means all Vacuo-based cards come with a bonus. See, you've got Sandstorm, Desert Scavenge, Resourceful Raider! You could use Sandstorm to disable my ground forces and simultaneously infiltrate my kingdom.
Can you make a bunch of doorways in Atlas that open at a single spot in Vacuo?
Why not just send them to Haven? Or Menagerie? Or Patch? Or just fucking in the middle of a lush forest or field somewhere in Vale? Why Vacuo? Are the characters stupid, or are the showrunners lazy? Take your pick. And on top of all of this hypocrisy and incompetence of the protagonists, the show decides to have this really shitty, sleazy ableism subplot. Ironwood losing limbs is symbolism for his loss of humanity. So I realize this might be a hard thing to wrap your head around when you're a dumb fuck hack who only got your job because your friends run the show, but losing limbs is a traumatic event that real people deal with, and pay attention to this next part, they are not less human for needing prosthetics. And you'd think that wouldn't be something you should have to explain to the writers who have already dismembered one of their protagonists, but I guess stupidity knows no bounds. Oh, but thinking back, once Yang got the robot arm, they started writing her to be a mondo cunt all the time, so maybe they've always had this prosthetics means no humanity belief.
I wasn't sure how you'd be doing without all of your teammates.
Well, as you can see, we're doing just fine.
Bitch! Why are you mad?
Yang certainly doesn't seem grateful that she's allowed to continue a normal life with a fully functioning right arm.
The mechanical parts are just extra.
I guess Maria's a villain too, since she needs her prosthetic eyes, and Pietro, since he needs his fancy wheelchair. Is that why they were forgotten 6 episodes into the volume, left to seemingly fly off into space while no one gave a fuck about them being missing? Or was it because they're not white? And this ableism plot makes its most baffling appearance with Penny, despite these lines.
You think just because you've got nuts and bolts instead of squishy guts makes you any less real than me?
Suddenly the tone all shifts to
Penny, the girl who's always been there underneath it. Her soul is who she is.
These writers are so eager to prove Ironwood's a bad guy for losing an arm that they also throw away years of beautiful sentiment about Penny being valid just the way she is to make her human. Why have nuance when adapting fairy tales when you can just wholesale copy the original's plot? Again. Oh no, they made her human so that her death would be permanent this time. Even though they already set up how Pietro didn't have enough aura to bring her back again.
And each time I rebuild Penny, it takes a little more. I won't be able to...
Also, if that's the goal, just don't bring her back in the first place. If you only revived Penny so she can die again, just fucking don't. Get your murder fix on a different character, rather than wasting our time with this offensive plot point. One that not only is ableist, but also ends with an assisted suicide. What a great message. Ironwood's a bad guy for losing an arm while wanting to save the world. Jean's a hero for slitting Penny's throat. Never mind the fact that he's a healer. Never mind the fact that Jean's helped people who had been blatantly more hurt than this before. Was Penny not worth saving because he didn't have a crush on her? I realize that I've wandered pretty far from my original topic of how they ruined Ironwood, but that's unfortunately an easy trap to fall into when talking about Volume 8. RWBY's latest season is filled with so many out-of-character moments, out-of-nowhere decisions by the cast, and impossible to comprehend logic behind the writer's motivations for plot points, that I can't help but find myself spiraling on how practically nothing was done well for the volume. But I'd like to try to refocus myself for the final thing that, annoyingly, needs to be addressed when talking about Ironwood. His semblance. Ironwood's semblance is called metal, and what it does is it strengthens his resolve, which allows him to hyper-focus. In essence, he's just neurodivergent, and if you don't know, neurodivergence is simply a difference in how a person thinks, how their brain functions. It's totally normal, and there's nothing wrong with being neurodivergent. This trait is honestly something Ironwood shares with Penny, who also ends up reading neurodivergent due to her different way of processing things by being robotic. But you don't need a semblance or a robot body to be neurodivergent. Like I said, it's totally normal. Characters like Whitley or Coco or literally anybody in the cast could be neurodivergent because those who are neurodivergent are normal people. The problem arises because the showrunners blame Ironwood's semblance on his turning evil. Look at the wiki to see how Metal is apparently to blame for all of Ironwood's mistakes, not only taking James's agency as a character away from him, but also painting his neurodivergent way of hyper-focusing as a problem. You know, from holding hands with a girl being a cure for PTSD, to implying needing a prosthetic arm makes you lose your humanity, to saying the oppressed slaves wanting equality are the bad guys, to now saying neurodivergence makes you do evil deeds. I'm getting really tired of Rooster Teeth's moral compass. Oh, and by the way, if you're surprised to learn Ironwood even had a semblance, yeah, that makes sense, cause it never gets brought up in the show. There is no indicator that it's happening with visuals or audio cues, despite the headcanons fans want to pretend is real. If you watched the show, read the books and manga, and listened to the soundtracks, you'd still have no idea that James even had a semblance. Fuck, his voice actor Jason Rose didn't even know about Metal. Miles revealed Ironwood's semblance in a Q&A, but even then, Eddie also tweeted that Miles's example of Metal helping James pull his arm through hard light dust was wrong, meaning the creators can't even seem to agree on when or how Metal activates. But really, they can't even keep their characters consistent between them all. Why would I expect shit like lore to be consistent between these clowns? And truth be told, Metal sounds like a bullshit excuse Miles made up to wave away Ironwood's sudden and drastic change in character, as if Miles and Carrie were able to see the raging inconsistencies in the way their character was written, that Ironwood's script was effectively the voice of a different character, and decided that they needed to come up with an excuse for his very sudden shift to allow James to become the genocide general. How convenient that these people making a show where everyone has cool superpowers fucking hate actually giving any of their characters superpowers. A good chunk of the RWBY community don't even consider Metal canon, and it's not hard to see why. A lazy excuse of a semblance used to explain the bad character writing that also ruins James's agency and paints neurodivergence as an inherent evil that isn't even in any way referenced in show. Yeah, it doesn't sound canon. It does read like the snotty comments you'll get fabricating whole elements of the show to push their unfounded narrative. And with how often these hacks will rewrite, re-release, retcon, and repugnantly pretend they'd simply written the show differently, it's hard to tell if Metal will actually be considered real by the next volume. The writers already can't agree on its use in the show. Why should we take their inconsistent, sloppy word to heart when the product is actively better when their excuse for Ironwood's villainy is ignored? Once again, Ironwood's Semblance is just another excuse to make the General a generic bad guy for no reason, even though they had established Ironwood's paranoid personality and his habit of using force over thought, despite building up an arc for him where his trust gets broken, setting him up for that I don't know who to trust anymore, which will put me against the heroes out of fear plot, even though they already had 7 villains in play for the volume. Rooster Teeth decided to throw every ounce of characterization and logic out the window so they could have their genocide general, all for seemingly no reason. Why make Ironwood a bad guy? If Ruby and Ozma's plan is to unite the world for the gods' second judgment, why not have the kids befriend all of the headmasters they can and unify them? Why kill off what was set up as a powerful, trustworthy ally? Why transform one of the girls' mentor figures into just another villain? Why choose to turn a character into a bad guy when, at this point, 8 years into the story, we should have the heroes dealing with the small army of actually established bad guys? I don't know. I want to make a guess, or at least a smarmy, sarcastic remark about it, but I just don't know. I cannot understand why most things were decided on for Volume 8. The intention of the writers and directors are impossible to follow, and I look at this end result, a favorite, well-written character, morphed into a proverbial buff jock so he could die off-screen. The very woman he had been so terrified of standing in front of him, and Ironwood is given no lines to comment on this. He isn't even allowed to emote when he sees her. Why did the writers decide this was a suitable end for an established hero? How do they think the story or characters benefit from this? I don't know, and if I'm being frank, I don't think they do either. RWBY isn't being written with story or characters in mind, it's being made with profits in mind. I used to let myself believe that Rooster Teeth could get better, that RWBY could be a product not only enjoyable to engage with, but one that I could even recommend to others. I don't believe that anymore. Ironwood's character and Volume 8 as a whole proved to me that no care goes into this show. It's been 8 years. I'm done expecting improvement at this point. So here we are. A neurodivergent man with prosthetics is made a de facto bad guy for those features, despite the 6 years of assisting the heroes and complex character writing behind him. Killed as his body and his kingdom gets flushed away by a group of kids unwilling to acknowledge their failures, while hypocritically denouncing anyone who doesn't follow their line of groupthink. This is where we are after 8 years of the show's creators refusing to listen to any criticism or attempting to improve their craft in any way. Are you proud of the show you've made? If yes, fucking why?
I've trusted him for years. We both have.
It's high time you stopped talking about trust and started showing it.
I realize that I was pretty harsh throughout this video in relation to talking about the showrunners, and I want to make it clear that I don't think any of them are bad people. I don't think there's any malicious intent behind their near constant fumbling of difficult topics, but I do still think it is important to bring up. Malice and ignorance aren't the same thing, and they shouldn't be confused. However, you can't keep relying on constantly being ignorant to get away with stuff like this. Like, basically every single time I talk about RWBY with my friend or my roommate or whoever it is, I end up bringing up things like their mishandling of PTSD, of abuse, of prosthetics, you know, all this, like, intense stuff. And I'm constantly adding the caveat of, and I'm sure that they didn't mean to do this. I'm sure that they didn't intend to imply this. But it's been years. Like, you can't keep just ignorantly fumbling your way forward into problematic and, in some cases, possibly dangerous writing mistakes. Like, educate yourself. You can't just stay ignorant as an excuse to these sorts of things. RWBY is a show that handles some pretty intense topics. It's why people talk about RWBY so much, because it's talking about important things. But you can't keep just not doing any research in relation to these things. You have to fucking actually do some research. If you want to talk about abuse, if you want to have an assisted suicide on your screen, if you want to do any of the stuff that I talk about in this video in relation to Ironwood, then you need to do some studying. And if you're not willing to do any of that, if you're not willing to educate yourself on the things you so desperately want to bring up in your show, then you need to bring in someone who is and who has the authority to tell you no. Because there has been talk about how the higher-ups in RWBY surround themselves with yes men, how their people aren't allowed to say no, to say, I think we should change this. Because if those rumors are true, okay, then you need to fucking stop. Okay? Because I know that you are most likely not bad people, but you are making bad decisions. You are portraying things poorly. So I just need to make sure everyone knows that I am not trying to say that anyone in RWBY are bad, that they are heinous, but I do think that they need to actually fucking look at how they handle these topics, and really, if they really want to bring up all of these difficult topics, then they need to do it right. It's their fucking job. So yeah. Sorry if that hurts their feelings, but it's the fucking truth. There's no walking around it at this point. If your fifis can't handle being told that you're being incredibly disrespectful to people, well then, get fucked, I guess. Cause I don't care if your feelings can't handle that, cause you're doing far more damage with your show, okay? Anyway, have a great day.